Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brief look at the astrological transits of Vladimir Putin for the year 2022. I'm James Moran. I'm an archetypal astrologer. I'm not a political analyst, so bear with me on the political side, but I can take you on a tour through the alignments of the planets, their symbolism, and what it seems to convey, the information it conveys to us about the kind of themes and rhythm of Vladimir Putin's year ahead. So there's actually also some information here that might be pertinent involving the house system in Vladimir Putin's chart. So this is a recording for the Archetypal News Network. I'm an archetypal astrologer, so we don't use the house system that much. And also the data for Vladimir Putin's birth chart is rated as DD by Lewis Rodden. And so that means that we don't know actually how we don't know how accurate the birth time is. Nevertheless, there's some interesting information to be had by looking at the house system, which I'll save for the end of the talk today. Looking at the alignments of the planets, though, we can see straight away. So this is the transit chart for the last day of February. Vladimir Putin's birth chart is in the center, wider concentric circle showing where the planets are on the last day of February 2022 is out here. And this will give us a sense of much of 2022 for Vladimir Putin, just because if we look at the outer planets, they move so slowly that a lot of these alignments will remain the same for much of 2022. So the first one to look at is that Saturn. This is transiting Saturn here at 18 degrees of Aquarius. You can always see the name up here on the upper left. So transiting Saturn at 18 degrees of Aquarius is opposite his natal Pluto at 22 degrees of Leo, and will remain that way for most of the year. Actually, will remain an orb of that alignment for all of the year, because Saturn is going to station around 24 degrees of Aquarius, retrograde back to 18 degrees of Aquarius, same 18 degrees that it's at right now. So it will remain in alignment with Pluto for much of the year. The Saturn-Pluto transit is a challenging one, because Saturn has to do with the heavy reality checks of life, such as failures, constrictions, constraints, heaviness, burden, kind of looming boundaries and finitude of reality. Opposite Pluto, Pluto is the intensifier archetype. So it just intensifies. Anybody who has observed themselves going through Saturn-Pluto transit, it's difficult. It's a difficult time. It's a time in which there can be kind of crushing blows of failure. There can also be projected outwards, a lot of psychological splitting. Whatever is the negative material one feels inside themselves, it gets projected outwards onto others. So they are the problem, not me. But from an outsider's perspective, a Saturn-Pluto transit is not one in which you want to engage in a campaign that you are hoping will go over with kind of overarching success. So Saturn-Pluto, difficult transit for the entire year. Another transit worth noting here, though, kind of in a contrary message to that Saturn-Pluto. So when I first looked at this transit chart and I saw the Saturn transit to natal Pluto, I thought, I wondered if this campaign of Vladimir Putin into the Ukraine would be a failure. I then saw that he has Neptune squaring his natal Mars. So this is Neptune right here, 22 degrees Pisces. He was born with Mars at 26 degrees of Sagittarius. So that red line right there is a square between Neptune and Mars, and that will be joined by Jupiter. So we'll have Jupiter transiting his natal Mars. And a Jupiter transit generally to natal Mars is associated with success. There can be an association of success with military pursuits, because Mars is associated with military pursuits and Jupiter is associated with success, archetype associated with success. Though the alignment is a square, it's 90 degrees. So Jupiter very soon will go into a 90-degree alignment to Vladimir Putin's Mars. Neptune is already in a 90-degree alignment to Vladimir Putin's Mars. So Jupiter, Mars in a square, in a very tense alignment, such as a square, can sometimes be like overarching, overreaching, overextending, because Mars is the archetype of forceful action, and Jupiter grants expansion. It grants success, it grants expansion, but it can also grant inflation, an inflated sense, particularly with Neptune there. So when we add Neptune to that combination, Neptune is the archetype of the vision, the kind of, it's the archetype that has to do with infinite planes, infinite expanses, the realms of heaven, the imagination, dreams, the kind of place from which inspiration comes to us, the visions of what's possible, which is a wonderful faculty that the movement of Neptune and the archetype of Neptune reflects in ourselves, although it's just in and of itself, it's not necessarily a grounded kind of confirmation that that vision is a reality or will ever be a reality. So Neptune with Mars transit can lead to, it can show up in actually a variety of ways, that can be, could be a sense of wanting to, of feeling inspired in one's forceful pursuits of Mars, or feeling or getting illusory sense of one's potential, of one's kind of militaristic or athletic or competitive potential or advantage. When Jupiter comes into aspect with, so it's a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction square to Mars, it'll be very interesting to see. I'll put it that way. It'll be very interesting to see how that shows up, because Jupiter, again, Jupiter with Mars can be the successful military pursuit. In a square to Mars, like we said, it could, connote over expansive tendencies. Jupiter Neptune, though, in square to Mars, Jupiter Neptune together is a very expansive visionary quality that's not necessarily grounded in actual achievement. It oftentimes gives a sense of inspiration and a sense of what's possible, a kind of a visionary, uplifted optimism. Yet at the same time, there is not necessarily any grounded anchoring in that combination itself that has anything to do with that kind of optimistic vision becoming a reality. So again, it'll be interesting to see how that combination shows up as we move forward through the year. Looking at this Uranus transit, he has Uranus transiting his natal Venus. Now that's an interesting combination. I do not pretend to know the motivations of Vladimir Putin, though I do believe I remember reading that he, I have a quote here actually of something that Putin said regarding the Ukraine and kind of like a shared sense of value that he perceives with the Ukraine. And he says that the Ukraine is an inalienable part of our history. I suppose he's meaning the history of Russia, of the culture and spiritual space. These are comrades, those dearest to us, not only colleagues and friends, people who once served together, but also relatives, people bound by blood and by family ties. So from my outsider perspective, it seems that there is a kind of association of the Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has that is a kind of a valuable part of the kind of identity of Russia, and movements made by the Ukraine to align with NATO or to be a sovereign, continue to be a sovereign nation. Who knows? Perhaps they have excited in Putin a sense that there is a kind of a breaking away, an independence, a freeing of something from his internal fold of what he considers to be his what he values and what his sense that his nation values. So there could be a sense of threat there, of part of a valued part of Russia, of what he considers a part of Russia, to be made independent, maybe even align with his opposition, such as NATO. So the Uranus transit to natal Venus is interesting because Venus has to do with our values. It has to do with our sense of harmonious whole, what we value, what matters to us. And Uranus is actually the archetype of freedom and independence. And so there could be a destabilization associated with that transit. If we were talking about somebody's life in which they were in a love relationship and the Venus represented the love relationship and Uranus is transiting natal Venus, sometimes there can be a kind of disruption in that love relationship that caused by a sense of need for independence that either comes up within oneself or within the lover, perhaps both. And that's a destabilizing factor, the fact of independence. So those three transits, those are planetary transits, the archetypes of the planets in tension with each other, intense alignments, bringing up possible insights as to the questions of why Putin is behaving the way he did. Maybe there's a sense that to his value structure, there's a threat of independence. Maybe there's a sense that he has more military might and ability for overextension of his military than he really does. Maybe he is going towards a kind of crash and burn situation, possibly with Saturn, Pluto. Who knows? Saturn, Pluto can also engender a sense of really staying on the course against really heavy, burdensome obstacles. So hopefully, who knows, maybe it will engender him with a sense of perseverance. You never know, but a Saturn Pluto transit usually is something that we would not want to enter into an endeavor in which we hope to succeed, have kind of a strong, overwhelming sense of success with a transit like that looming. So those are the three archetypal combinations: Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Neptune, Mars, and Uranus, Venus. If we were to diverge and look at the house system, again, with the caveat that the 9:30 a.m. Time of birth for Putin has a Rodin rating of DD, which means, I believe it means dirty data. It means that it's not verified. So we don't really know if he was born at that time. Though if he was, there would be significant transits in terms of the house system as well, simply because the transit of Saturn through what would be in the whole sign house is the fourth house, which is Aquarius, has to do with the land, the homeland, the sense of ancestral history. And Saturn is associated with separation. And then interestingly, Uranus is over here on this side of the chart. This side of the chart that has the descendant, which usually is associated with the other in one's birth chart, the other. In fact, the seventh house and the descendant is usually considered the point that's associated with the other in relationship and correct collaboration and partnership. So that could bring in a sense of Uranus transiting, that sense of independence. Could be destabilizing because it could give a sense that the lover or the collaborator or the partner or whoever is the other in one's sphere of experience is representing a Uranian energy. Uranian energy of independence can be very destabilizing. As the year goes on, this Uranus transit will come into a orb with Jupiter. And Jupiter Uranus is usually kind of like the successful independence, the successful get out of jail free card. And again, we don't know if this is the seventh house. We don't know if this is the descendant side of the chart, though in a chart in which that position is there, when there's a Uranus transit to natal Jupiter on that side of the chart, it can represent that the final kind of successful release of the other in one's life. So anyways, that's interesting to note. Even if that seventh house is not there, even if we weren't to look at that aspect, we didn't know what time he was born, just the fact that Uranus is an aspect to his natal Venus is a similar symbolism. The seventh house and Venus, they're very similar, particularly Taurus is in the seventh house, which is also a sign associated with Venus. So there's a lot of symbolism there that supports each other, even if we don't look at the houses. So we'll see, we'll see. It'll be, now that we have some intel, we can kind of observe a little bit more intentionally as the year moves on. We can observe, we can see that Saturn cranking down on his natal Pluto. We can see the sense of the heaviness, the burden, the possibility for failure, the possibility for kind of collapse, constriction. As Jupiter goes on to natal Neptune and is squaring his natal Mars, we can look out for that too. Is there inflationary tendency? Is there kind of a dream that's not realistic around the Mars sense of military expansion or forceful action? As Uranus transits natal Venus, possibly the 7th house, we can also see, is that destabilizing? How is that destabilizing energy evolving throughout the year that has to do with values, value systems, and versus independence? So a brief look at the transits of Vladimir Putin. One more thing, actually, before I go, one more transit, very interesting to note, is that there is going to be a Mars retrograde at the end of this year. So this is a transit for November, and Mars is retrograde in the sign of Gemini. Again, we don't have proof that he was born at 9:30 a.m. If he was, and that was the 8th house, and Mars is retrograde in the 8th house for several months, just traditionally the 8th house is associated with it. It's a difficult transit of Mars, not necessarily one that is kind of generally thought to be successful. So Mars retrograde, backing up in terms of all things militaristic and all things athletic, competitive, all forceful action, kind of getting backed up, rethought. So it's worth noting, hey, maybe nations of the world could gain a lot by looking at astrology and their planning of their years ahead. So Mars retrograde towards the latter half of 2022. That's the last one I'll bring in. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the astrological transits of Vladimir Putin in 2022. I'm James Moran, archetypal astrologer. Thanks for being with me here, and thanks for being with Archetypal News Network, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.